Hi, my name's Lee Jasper. This is Brixton, London, and you're watching Lee Jasper Drive Time.
Hi, good morning and welcome to Lee Jasper's Drive Time, Saturday. Still in the middle of lockdown. How you all coping out there? Hope you're doing well. And in these very challenging and difficult times, glad to be able to bring you Lee Jasper's Drive Time Home Edition this morning. It's a glorious day in London. I've got a week full of rain and clouds. So do get out there and enjoy some sun. This week, we're looking at centering young black women. All black women under 30 years of age, all leaders in their particular field. And are just so delighted to be able to offer the platform to give space for this next generation of leadership. It's my second all-women platform. And can I say you, probably about 50% of my programs are going to be women. Why? Because they make up 50% of our communities. I don't need to apologize. It's not a special project. It's reflecting the reality of our community. Yes, we will do some black male only programs, and we've done so. We'll probably do some in the future. But I like to hear the voices of the next generation of leaders, and these are young, gifted, and black people who are making cutting-edge contributions in their own way. I'm delighted to be able to introduce them to you. This week has been a hugely momentous week, and we've seen the ongoing demonstrations in relation to George Floyd taking place both in America and around the world. We saw the memorial. We saw my dear brother, Reverend Al Sharpton, somebody I've known for many years and facilitated his first visit to this country way back in 1993 over the murder of Roland Adams. Roland Adams was the black boy to die 1 year before Stephen Lawrence. His name's not usually remembered. It is by me. And if the Adamses are watching, and they normally are, Audrey and Richard, still saluting you. So I brought him over very early on in his career, and he made a fabulous speech at the memorial for George Floyd, where he talked about using the metaphor, the knee on the neck. And I think these two phrases, I can't breathe and get your knee off my neck, off our neck, are going to be resounding around the world for a long time to come. And of course, we saw the Black Lives Matter movement moving to gear in the United Kingdom. Now, let me explain something about the Black Lives Matter movement. It's not a single body. It's not a unified group. They've purposely chosen not to organize in that way. So it's separate chapters of young people coming together to do their own individual things. This week, we saw them call a demonstration in central London, which has now been cancelled. It was for today, but as a consequence of the huge outpouring, really, of racism that I saw online, with the Football Lads Alliance and Tommy Robinson and everybody talking about we're going to come to London to defend our statues, and the ranting and the racism, even some racism on my page. And can I just say that? I had threats of violence on my Facebook page yesterday from Football Lads Alliance. Now, I get threats of violence normally anyway, being an activist, but there were quite a few of them. And I put up a post that says, ignorant white people threatening violence on my page. I'm not intimidated. Do you know that Facebook banned me for 3 days? Why? I've got no idea, but I'm suspended for 3 days for that post. So if you are online, because I can't share on my platform, having been strangled by FaceRack, could you share the program around the place and let people know that we are live this morning, and give us a thumbs up that you're getting us? Do start a watch party amongst your friends and family, yeah, try and let's get around the reactionary response of Facebook. Black man gets threatened with violence, complains about it, gets banned from Facebook. That's justice in the new millennium world. Those demonstrations now being cancelled. I think there's a demonstration outside the American Embassy today. So if you are intending to go to any of the demonstrations that may be planned as a consequence of the central London demonstration being cancelled, please be safe. These fascists are very well organized. Many of them are ex-military personnel. They know exactly what they're doing. I've faced them many times in my 40-year career, and you have to be really organized in order to protect yourself and those who've gone on those demonstrations. But as long as you're not in central London, and as long as you're not intending to go there, I think you'll be fairly safe. I just put out a warning, and if you go on my Facebook page, you'll see a rough guide to surviving a fascist demonstration that I put out. It's got enormous traction and been shared countless number of times. Can't tell you how many because I can't see my page, but it's been shared quite a lot of times. And what I'm saying is the fascists are gathering at Victoria at 11 o'clock, right? And then they will at some point leave there and walk to Parliament Square, where they will protect the statue of Winston Churchill, which is in a box today. This is rather appropriate. We're going to have these morons standing around a statue that you can't see, covered in a box, while we're all somewhere else laughing at them. I think that's got a sort of delicious irony to it, which other people better than me will fathom out and think of. Now, the point I'm making is stay away from the Victoria area. Because in my experience, when these boys come, they're drunk, they're high on coke, they're rowdy, and if they see black people, especially young black people, as we saw in the video in Coventry earlier this week, where two young black boys were surrounded by a baying mob, they will attack. So if you're a black cab driver, and I mean that literally, a black cab driver, if you are a shop in the Victoria area, maybe Asian, maybe black, if you are a tourist or you're in the black and in the Victoria area, when they spill out of Victoria Station, please take care and make sure you're not in that immediate vicinity. I want you all to stay safe, beloved. These are dangerous times and you need to take precautions as black community. I'll come back to these issues of security and self-defense and the community in future issues. But for today, if you are intending to go to a demonstration, please be safe, please be peaceful. Please stay away from the Victoria area. Go to the American Embassy and make your protest there. I think that's where the action will be at some point today. The march is being advertised on Instagram. The demonstration is being advertised on Instagram in relation to the American Embassy, so you can find it there. Well, today, as well as this week, as well as the incidents in relation to the Black Lives Matter movement, we had a fabulous announcement, didn't we, from Stormzy. He's going to invest £10 million in black community organisations on the front line over the next 10 years. It's £1 million a year. That's just absolutely fantastic. And lots of us have always said, haven't we, that, you know, those who have made it into the big league, if they would only commit to investing in our community organisations, it would make a big difference. So I'd like to applaud Stormzy for doing, I'd like to applaud Stormzy for making that example. And he's not alone. I mean, let me just say this, you know, I know lots of these high profiling superstars and they're investing in our community. They're not making a song and dance about it. They're not out there in the media. I think Stormzy is probably one of the biggest, but other people are doing some fantastic work too. So let's applaud what they are doing rather than pointing out what they're not doing. I think Stormzy's contribution is great. You get a Lee Jasper 5-star black salute, son. Long may that commitment continue. So today we're focusing on black women, and oh dear my days, have we got a panel for you. We've got Fatima Keller. She's a feminist advisor. We've got Khalilia Ismail, who's the CEO and founder of Jamil UK. You're going to hear more about all of these individuals in a little bit later. Ethel Tambudzai. I hope I said that right. Tambudzai. I think that's a fantastic name. I mean, it's a great name. I love saying it. It rolls off the tongue. Tambudzai. CEO of Sonar, and a business strategist. You know, I'm always very keen on business. You can have law, you can have politics, but you've got to have an independent economy in order to support both. And then finally, Ife Thompson, community activist and barrister. Ife is somebody I've known for a long time. She does absolutely fantastic work in Brixton, and they're all on the program. So, okay, let us open up and bring in our guest. First, let's bring in Fatima. Fatima Keller, are you with us?
Hello, thank you, Lee. Good morning, everybody. So a quick introduction about myself. I am a women's rights advisor and strategist. I've been doing that now for nearly 20 years. So actually, young woman may not be the best way to describe me on the back of that. Although, having said that, you know, it's the definition of youth is extending these days, and maybe I can definitely offer some insights about the kinds of things that will start to happen once you get into your 30s and the challenges and opportunities in that space as well. Just for anyone who doesn't quite understand what a feminist advisor would be, I work across different sectors, the economic justice space in particular, education and health, and I do most of my work outside of the UK, actually, in Africa, and I've worked in South Asia and the Caribbean as well. I was born in Nigeria, and I spent the first 10 years of my life there, and then we moved over here, and I was raised in Brixton Hill, South London, so that's just as much home, yes. And all of those kind of different aspects of my life inform the work that I do in these areas. I'll stop there.
Fatima, thank you very much. Everybody's young to Uncle Lee, so that description. Okay, well, let's bring in Kalila Ismail, CEO and founder of Jamil UK. Are you with us?
Hi, how are you?
Well, delighted to have you. Tell us what you do.
So I'm Kalia. I'm the founder of Dammy, which is a discount card and marketplace for Black-owned businesses in the UK. And so I started it back in August 2016 in response to the Black Lives Matter movement, which was massive and prevalent back then. For me, I felt that as a community, we're incredible when it comes to organising politically and kind of getting the word out and building up protests and stuff. But there seemed to be a missing economic base and something which could create change for us when we don't have the energy to go out and protest, because that's not something that we should be needing to do all the time. We should have organizations and businesses who are able to fund our initiatives and fight the causes for us. And so I wanted to create a platform which made buying from Black-owned businesses, finding Black-owned businesses as easy and as instinctive as shopping from any other mainstream alternative. Which is why we made it a discount card as well. So something that can get people to think about shopping from Black-owned businesses every time you've got something to buy, because everyone loves a discount. And so it's just like something to kind of hack the way people think and get people to change their habits. And also incentivize people to try new brands. So we've been going since August 2016, and there's now 2 of us in the team, myself and my sister, who joined towards the end of last year.
Kalia, thank you very much for that introduction. The Black economy, making Black shopping instinctively intuitive. I just love that phrase. Intuitive. Buy Black first, then second. I'm with you on that program for sure. Okay, let's bring in Ethel Tambudzai. I hope I've got that right, of all the emphasis I'm placing on that surname. I'm pronouncing it right, probably not. Have I got it right, Ethel?
No, that is right. That is right, actually.
Well, Ethel, welcome on Lee Jasper's Drive Time. Introduce yourself to our audience. Tell us who you are.
Cool. Thank you much, Lee, for having me today. I'm Ethel Tambudzai, co-founder of Sona, CEO and co-founder of Sona, which is a platform connecting Black communities around the world. We launched in October 2019, and our main goal was, we were seeing a lot of different Black experiences, but they often get whitewashed out of the media, or the Black experience is often seen as one experience, even though many people are coming from many parts around the world, born and have many different experiences and identify as many different things. And we wanted to shed light to what those experiences were by capturing those members' stories and highlighting them and amplifying them across media, across social media, and across our events that we were hosting pre-lockdown as well. So we believe in the collective wealth of the diaspora to self-sustain through information sharing, through building capital, and also improving access to opportunities. So I strongly align with Kalia's sentiment in building Jammy, because I think a lot of protests are happening frequently, but we don't have many structures that people turn to after those protests to keep that momentum going through spending and through supporting Black-owned businesses. And I guess my business strategist side is with experience in business development. I help people with businesses look at how they've structured their businesses, and from a corporate governance side, show them how they can be compliant and match up with different funding criteria, for example, or make themselves a stronger structure so that they're better recognized by different institutions for partnership. I guess that's me. And my co-founder is Giselle Frederick, whose former startup was Zinger as well.
Wonderful. I just love this economic focused. Protest is very well, and it's much needed. But unless you've got an underpinning economy to support your community, your politics, and your legal community to support our challenges, then you're always going to be a lesser community as a result of that. So love the emphasis. Bringing in now our final guest this morning, Ife Thompson, community activist extraordinaire and barrister. Recently got that white wig that allows her to prosecute and defend him on the ends. Ife.
Can I just add to correct you? Actually, I've just been called to the bar, but I'm not. I haven't got pupillage yet, so I can't.
Right, okay. Well,
don't come and message me asking for help, because I'm not the one. But I can direct you to someone who can help you until I get to that stage, hopefully. So thank you for that introduction.
To me, Effie.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. So yes, I really valued the title of community activism, because for me, community is key and everything flows from the community. And, centering the community in mind, particularly the Black community, that being from Brixton and those in the wider remit. I founded an organization called BLAM, which stands for Black Learning, Achievement and Mental Health. And we have been running for 3 years now. And similar to Kalia, we've literally started off the back of Black Lives Matter movement in 2016. We started as a static march. Because we was frustrated about the injustices that our global Black community was facing, but also Black rich people in the UK as well. And then what we really wanted to have a structure and a base that would continue, even as you said, after protest. So BLAM, as you can hear, Black Learning, Achievement, Mental Health, we have a big focus on the education system and how it is for Black British children. So what we have been doing and what we are continuing to do is going into schools and teaching Black history, and we do it over a sustained period, because it can't just be a one-day session, it can't just be 1 month. We want Black history to be in the curriculum and to be normalized. Actually, it shouldn't be a discussion. Black History Month shouldn't have to exist, because Black history should be taught every single day. So we go into schools running sessions on a weekly basis with young people to improve their well-being and their racial esteem. And then also we provide, my background's in law, so I'm passionate about using the law to support communities as well. So we've started a school exclusion advocacy project that supports Black parents, because in the UK, Black children are 3 times more likely to be excluded from school, particularly Black Caribbean students, and there is no legal aid for this area of law. So what we've done is engage with the communities we see that as a problem, and provide advocates that can go, and even if it's just drafting a letter, if it's going for the school governing board, and we're not restrictive in who we help, because I know some other education advocacy organizations only help those that have had a permanent exclusion, but for us it's important to get in at the earliest stage possible, and support around fixed term exclusion. So we're very big around supporting community, hosting events that bring the community together, and we host quarterly events in which Lee has been one of our amazing speakers, had the room on fire. and we, you know, bring the Black community together and have that intergenerational dialogue that we wouldn't normally have. So it's quite a nice space in which we encompass different age ranges, but all around learning and seeing how we can have solutions for our community. And then recently, my latest initiative, which has been the Black Process Legal Support Group, which is a hub of barristers and solicitors I've gotten together that are willing to support any Black Lives Matter activists. So we've had lawyers on the ground for the past couple of days, you know, monitoring what's been going on, ensuring there's police accountability, and just seeing how they can support the community as well. So I'm all about trying to see how different factions, different people can come together and use their skills to support the community.
Well, a lot to take in from all four of our fabulous guests. Now, listen, I'll just repeat it again for those of you just joining. I complained about white people threatening violence on my Facebook page. They banned me for 3 days for complaining about white violence directed against a Black man. So I've not been able to promote on my page. I'm going to need you to do that for me. So if you could use your good self and get this program shared so we can get a proper audience, I'd be deeply grateful. I'm sure our guests would be too. As we go to our general discussion now, I'm going to ask each of the guests in turn to talk to us for 5 minutes about the general analysis, COVID, George Floyd, international African diaspora here in the UK. What is their analysis? What is their diagnosis? What is their prognosis on the issues that face our community from their perspectives? And after that, as you know, the program is news you can use. So we want you to post your questions. So do take time to think about what they're saying. Put your questions on screen, and panelists will pick them up and address them. I may pick them up and address them. But I'm more interested in hearing from our panelists today. So having said that, let's get straight to it. Give this platform to the next generation of young, gifted and Black leaders here in the UK. So, these are tremendously difficult times. I wonder if I could go to Ethel and just ask her to come in and give us a overview, Ethel, of how you see the current conditions facing our community, the opportunities, the threats, the analysis. Over to you.
Thank you, Lee, for that very wide and big question, straight up. But I think, so Black Lives Matter in the UK, I think it's important to remember the life of George Floyd, because that was a tragic death that the whole world managed to watch, to witness. And I think a lot of people have been experiencing post-traumatic syndrome from that. And it's a reminder of the violence that is happening around the world, and even here in the UK, that people don't often get their voices heard on a large scale about. So I think Black Lives Matter in the UK, for me personally, and from what I've seen, is a lot about the frustrations that people have been holding on for many years, and rightly so, for justice that's not been served. We look at the Grenfell Tower fire that happened 3 years ago this weekend, and we're still waiting for any justice to be served around that. We look at the social and economic inequalities of the majority of Black communities living within social housing, being the first to be unemployed when crises such as COVID lockdowns and the Brexit job losses happen. We look at informal exclusions that Ife was talking about, that aren't necessarily formalized within the school system. So those young black children aren't able to receive help beyond the school system that they're depending on. We look at welfare. We look at the welfare system and the way it's prejudiced against people of color, because you just have so much more to prove with documentation. We look at the Windrush generation, and we look at the Windrush scandal of hundreds and thousands of people who've been denied fair treatment in the UK because they can't provide documents. We look at, so my grandparents, for example, were the first generation of my family to come to the UK, and they came in the late 60s, met in Reading, and I remember them talking to me about the Brixton riots, talking about all the riots that they went on and the Mark Duggan cases that have now gone back to Zimbabwe. And as I'm marching in the UK for Black Lives Matter, I'm also thinking about the situation that's happening in Zimbabwe as a migrant here in the UK. I'm thinking about all the injustices that are often forgotten when we think about Black lives existing within white spaces or within the UK, within America, within Europe, and the injustices that Black people and the microaggressions that we all live with, and the microaggressions we've learned to internalize and accept as the norm of what we can expect from society, when people choose to ignore the realities of, people choose to ignore like the fact that when you apply for a job, because your name might not be fully English, you're less likely to go on to the interview stage. So I think in general analysis of Black Lives Matter in the UK, yes, it's not just a US issue. And many people have been asking, why now? Why do we care about this now? And I think the report by the National Statistics Office that came out a week before the protests that shows Black people are 4 times more likely to die from COVID. We must ask why. Why is it structurally so that Black bodies are more disposable, not only in public service as key workers on the front line within the NHS, but why is it they're more disposable when they're accessing justice or have been accused of crimes or have been imprisoned for crimes and are still more likely to die because of the lack of protection they're facing within the public institutions? I feel like I've spoken really academically or like with many big words there, but I think Black Lives Matter is about the frustration of people whose history is centered in the UK, not just because they've chosen to come to the UK, but for the generations of people whose livelihood is built in the UK because of the Commonwealth, which then means we'll have to look at slavery. And why is it that so many Black people have come to the UK? We're actually 4% of the UK population, but we experience about 40% of, or we are faced with 40% of marginal unemployment. We're faced with lack of access to public services. And I think it's not all just based on people not wanting to access those services, but it's also structurally built so. People say the system is broken, but the system was never built to support Black people at its core. And we understand we're 4%, but we must understand, how did that 4% get here? How was the UK's history built? It doesn't exist without Black people. It doesn't exist with people from across the Commonwealth, not only building the statues that we're now fighting and things, which is a different story, but it's about how did the UK become an economic power to where it is? We can't ignore that history if we're ever to move forward from it. And I think a real opportunity for Black communities right now is reassessing how we want to be moving forward. We have racism, which we'll be fighting, I think, for a long time, unfortunately, and that's a structural, institutionalized issue. It's across public sector, it's across health services, education, employment, and the private sector. But what can we do now to make sure that as we go forward, how are we supporting Black businesses? But also, how are those Black businesses giving back within into Black communities? What is the change that we want to see? What does that look like? Politically, who do we have that's running and standing for positions of power for us? Within education, where are those Black teachers? How do we encourage more Black people to become teachers so that there's reduced discrimination in examinations, but also in keeping young Black children in school? Around the schools, I'm just going to give a shout out to Aspire Education Group, who are doing their first national survey, and I think the first one being done, on trying to understand the experiences of teachers and parents on the experiences of their children around the UK, of Black children, Black teachers and Black parents, on what are their experiences of the UK educational system, and how can we effectively work with them to change and challenge the system's bias.
Thank you very much, Ethel. Great opening salvo there, giving us a broad analysis of some of the issues and challenges that face our community. And if you watched the program last week, if you didn't, dip into the archives and find it, and because the Aspire Education survey was front and center in that program. Important that we survey our own community to speak with our voice on those issues from an unrefracted, black, unapologetic perspective. So if we have the studio to post the link to Aspire Education Survey on screen, you can follow that and support that struggle. And very, very many important points, not least the importance of economy, which I shall keep coming back to time and time and time again as an important underpinning for our struggle going forward. I'm going to now move on, if I may, and bring in Fatima, who will talk to us and give us her own unique analysis on the issues and challenges of the day. Fatima.
Thank you, Lee. Yeah, so starting off first of all with Black Lives Matter. The first thing that struck me following the death of George Floyd was he's not the first. I mean, Eric Garner was also not the first. And that's a name that actually I have not seen come up that much. But, you know, we'll remember I Can't Breathe. I think it was 2014. And we were out, you know, protesting. I remember there was a demonstration in Brixton. And that day was interesting because it was a peaceful demonstration. It wasn't huge, but it was strong. We completed the tour around the various streets. And then once we had done that, there was this sense of, have they heard? You know, there was this real overwhelming sense of, we've done all of this, people have watched us as we've gone by, this will be posted on social media, there may be some news crews here, but have they heard this? And so we came back and we sat in the intersection, you know, between the library and the town hall and KFC, those of you who know Brixton, and we just kind of occupied that space and we didn't move, and everybody just sat down and all the buses stopped and etc. Because I felt this palpable frustration that we just can't leave it here. And the reason why I bring this up is because actually I think there's a trauma to this entire process that we are going to be going through, you know, that we're going through now, both in the witnessing of the dehumanization of Black bodies on our screens, but then also in the conversations that are now coming up of, you know, colleagues, you know, white acquaintances coming up and saying that for the first time, maybe they fully understand, you know, what the issues were, you know, and there's a frustration in that. You know, and there's a trauma in having to then start to break things down. I was on a call just yesterday with a group of women of color, Black and women of color who work in my space, in the kind of women's rights international industry. And, you know, the conversations being had there in this charity sector, you know, largely charity sector, was that the right things were being said, but really and truly, will things change even within these institutions in terms of the way they understand and address the structural inequalities at play? And then also the burden that then comes on to Black people within those organizations now to have to start breaking things down, you know, if they start deciding to putting things into motion, you know, trainings, etc. There's a lot of burden and onus in that, as much as it's what we want and what we need to be done. And how do you guard yourself against the trauma that comes with that? Because truly, you know, these things go in waves. And so you're going to have a situation where probably in the coming months, this is not going to be as centered as it is at the moment. And that's when the sense of trauma could get stronger, because that's when you start to look at things being lost. And the progress that has been made. So the questions that we have to start asking ourselves is, what do we do to guard ourselves when that comes? And how do we maintain this momentum? And then that then brings me on to this whole issue of history and the toppling of statues. And, you know, these statues do need to come down and a conversation needs to be had about them. I was reading today that apparently if they do come down based on problematic histories, pretty much every single statue between something like 1618 and 1818 will need to come down. So that's a lot of stuff. You know, the backlash to that, let's be ready for it. Right now, it may seem to be kind of relegated to the right-wing space, but it will eventually start coming through in the mainstream, as it has done, you know, even at the governmental level. The real issue is the way in which we teach history, and this is a conversation that's been had for a long time now, right? And history is my research love. It's what I studied initially at university, and so I know how problematic the history teaching in this country is. The historical amnesia that we have is absolutely criminal. And the question is more than just about the curriculum, but it's also about who teaches it, who these individuals are, and the way that it's taught. And so there's a massive conversation that needs to be had in this space, and whether or not Britain is ready to deal with that history is something that is going to be played out in the next few weeks. I mean, it's the first time I'm seeing an acceptance of a questioning of Nelson's column in a way that I have not seen before. I remember seeing Afia Hirsch go on Good Morning Britain, or whatever that program is called now in the morning, and after she wrote an article about Nelson's column being problematic, and having to deal with such passive aggressive backlash. Now, for the first time, you can actually say these things, and there's a space for a conversation. So there is hope, but it's a long, long road. Let's make no doubt about that. And then that brings me to my final point, really, which is about the relationship that this has with global structural inequalities. So we look at, and then this is the space that I work in specifically. So you look at the global economic structure, and it is completely and utterly prejudiced and loaded against countries from the global south and countries that would be considered Black in particular. So African countries, Caribbean countries. The entire system has been rigged essentially since the 1960s and 70s on the back of the independence movement, specifically to ensure that development is stagnated and that we are essentially tied. Now, COVID-19 is going to deepen that even more. I was reading an article maybe a few days ago that was suggesting that Africa is going to come out with nearly 3 to 4 times more debt on the back of this pandemic than previously. And we're already in ridiculous amounts of debt. And that debt comes with huge conditionalities that prevent African countries from instituting the kind of macroeconomic policies that can actually make changes to the lives of its people. Nigeria just the other day announced huge cuts in education and health spending. And what this does is open up the space for private sector to come in and essentially commodify an entire sector, which should be rights-based, should be equal access, and should, in my opinion, be free for all. Now, this might seem slightly tangential, but actually, when we look at the global spaces of power and we look at what that linkage is with the Black Lives Matter movement, you cannot separate them. So when Africa is finding itself in a situation, and when Caribbean countries are finding themselves in a situation at the global table, they are unable to actually reject a conditionality that is going to continue to impoverish their citizens for the next 10, 15, 20, even longer. You are looking at a different type of abuse, a different type of violence on Black bodies. And this has its different layers. So I think it's important for us to also be able to connect those dots. And just on that final one, if there's one thing that this Black Lives Matter movement right now and the death of George Floyd might have done, actually, from a personal perspective, is to address some of the issues that we even have on the continent regarding right-wing thought. The number of Trump supporters that I find on Nigerian Twitter continues to make me cry. So if this is a moment in which we can actually be able to center the politics of Blackness globally, properly, then this is a good moment. And this is something that we can actually strive for and hope for, but it's a long road. I'll stop there.
And centering the politics of Blackness globally. While I'm talking to Black women, you're getting all the juice. Getting the high-level masterclass, not just about your particularism in your area of UK or whatever, but in the global sense. And in post-COVID, the politics of public health and the politics of international African diaspora disadvantage will have to be addressed in any new normal in which the historical debts of Africa are wiped out. I was a founder member of Jubilee 2000, the debt cancellation campaign founded in 2000. And that work still needs to continue. So now I'm going to go on. Thanks for that. Ife Thompson, coming from another Brixtonite. We're heavy on Brixtonite today, boy. That's why you're getting the international content right here. If Thompson, give us your overall analysis of the situation as we see it.
For me, I can see that the lack of history being taught in schools and people's, not understanding the nuance linkage between, Black history and European history and how we interconnect, allows people to have a sort of amnesia. So I'm seeing a lot of people say, oh, why is the UK getting involved? And, people are surprised that the UK is showing solidarity. However, if we look back in history, and even if we don't go too far back to just the 60s, Malcolm X came to visit the UK, was very much involved in supporting struggles here as well against racism. And you had Sophie Carmichael that also came here as well. So, when I'm hearing people say, oh, why is the UK getting involved and why is the UK so passionate? We've had a tradition of always standing up against racism anyways, and it's always been very much connected to America as well. Like we've had the British Black Panther Party as well. So we see that when we are having struggles, they are very much intertwined, and you can see the parallels with racism affecting us in the UK, and movements that have been created here as well to combat racism based off of the structures that have been implemented in America, and the names that are used the same. So for me, I think it's problematic because obviously Black history is not taught in the schools. People think that, oh, why are they getting involved? And also I think people seem to forget that, as protesters have been saying, the UK is not innocent. Do you know what I mean? And it's like we've had our uprisings because of Mark Duggan's death. We've also had issues in terms of other Black men that have died disproportionately at the hands of the police, Rashawn Charles, and there was an uprising against that. So it's not unusual for us to, in this way, express our grievance and, let our voices be heard. And, I think it's important to remember that. And I think another point that I actually remembered as well was that, the UK was very involved in 2016 Black Lives Matter movement as well. There was many people that were marching. I think there was about 4 or 5 marches at that period as well. And, people weren't questioning, oh, why is the UK getting involved, because they understood the solidarity between the two movements. I think this problem of collective amnesia needs to be broken away. I think the only way that can be done is if we as a country teach history in a way in which it is something that is permanent on the agenda. But also I think Black narratives are consistently centered, and I think when you have that break, when you have that idea that, oh yeah, things are okay because you haven't been having Black people speak on these issues, you would forget that these problems are here. And I think we've been able to, through this movement now, center a lot of issues in the UK. As we mentioned, the Windrush renovation, we're still dealing with all of the backlog from that. We're still dealing with the Grenfell issues, and there's a lot more issues that have been brought to the forefront. Justice for Belly Mujinga, who, since all the protests have been happening, the CPS are now going to review the decision to charge someone or to investigate. So you can see that, there is a collective empowerment of us using our voices to speak up. And I think, we also need to remember that we are in a decade of the UN's decade of people of African descent, and not a lot of people know about that decade. But that decade is specifically dealing with globally the issues that people of the African diaspora are experiencing because of colonization and because of slavery. And I think, again, when I go on the UN's website and I read the sort of commentary and the articles and, the vastness of what that decade hopes to cover, I'm in amazement. And I feel like, that decade was first implemented, I say, around 2014. And, now it's going to be to 2024. But we don't have these dialogues, and it's like, if this decade was implemented and people were centering narratives of Black people, then, some of the issues that we're having today may have been eradicated. Well, not eradicated, but, there may have been some sort of progress. But we can see time and time again, we talk about issues within the Black community and we are ignored. And I think, when you are a community that's constantly ignored, we don't see change, you're going to have to use your collective voice. And I think, this is a way in which many people have been able to express themselves. And the way in which this has been structured around the pandemic, you cannot ignore it. These videos that have gone viral, you cannot ignore them. Normally we'd be working, we'll be going about our normal days. There's ways to escape. People charities way to escape discrimination against Black people. But right now, the world's at a standstill. You cannot ignore us anymore. So I think, the global pandemic that we are in, and I think the histories and the structural racism that Black people experience, I think is all boiled to a point, and it's like global solidarity. I mean, I'm seeing Black people in France protesting. I'm seeing Black people in Belgium protesting. We see like a global connection because, you know, we as the Black diaspora, the African diaspora, our histories are interlinked and our experiences are interlinked, and we are all fighting against the same racism. So I think it's, you know, a beautiful moment that everyone is coming together, centering our voices, and, you know, seeing how we can, you know, create a better system, because, you know, we cannot be having marches every single 4 years. This cannot be the norm. And I think, you know, everyone is using their collective voice and seeing, you know, what can they do within their space. And I think that is very powerful. I think conversations are being had. I think, you know, people are speaking out. I think that is powerful. And I think we should, you know, continue with that same train of thought. But, you know, as we said, it's important for us to organize and strategize. And I think, you know, that's just the next steps. But I think the fact that the conversation is being had, and the fact that people who normally don't speak about these issues are being centered and, you know, taking this opportunity to speak out about injustice, I think, you know, that is powerful in itself.
Thank you very much, Ife. Powerful commentary indeed. And this idea about Black history. Black history is global, international history. It's British history, it's the European history, it's African liberation history. It is global history. And certainly the move to get this integrated into the national curriculum is very, very important. We're now going to move on to Kalia, is mine, and she is the CEO of and the founder of Jamil UK. You're our final speaker, so you get to you're squeezed on the issue that you can talk about. I know how that feels sometimes, but I'm sure you've got a contribution to make. So over to you, sister. You're on mute at the moment.
Oh.
Yeah. Great.
So, everything that Ethel, Fatima, and Ife said, I completely, wholeheartedly agree with. I won't speak too long, because I think they've covered most of the bases. I mean, from my perspective, from being a Black business owner and seeing all of the support, I really think that we're in a real moment. We're in a real moment in which more than I've ever seen, so many people are focused on what's going on what the structural issues that Black people face, the racial inequalities that Black people face, and not just talking about police brutality in America. I mean, a lot of people are thinking, oh, you know, what, as if I said, why are people so bothered about what's happening in America? Because, you know, the police here don't have guns. But actually, more and more people are starting to realize we're talking about structural inequalities. The community is disadvantaged. The community is oppressed, not just in America, here in France, in the Netherlands, as Fatima was saying, globally, when we look at African and Caribbean nations. And from my perspective, I've seen more people start to acknowledge that, and it's particularly non-Black communities as well, really starting to acknowledge that, which from the perspective of like, how are we going to get change going, how are we going to ensure that this moment lasts, that in 4 years' time, as if they were saying, we don't have to protest, there is actual legitimate change, I think is really important. But I think also we have to acknowledge that this, first of all, this moment takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of energy from all of us to be fighting, to expose ourselves to the traumatic videos and images, even traumatic statistics and stories. That's draining, and we won't be able to keep that up. And so it's about how can we harness everything that's going on right now to make that change? How can we take this energy and be like, everyone is angry right now, everyone is adamant, everyone is laser focused on this issue right now. How can we make sure that in August, in October, in 2021, 22, etc., that there are things happening that means that we don't have to come back and subject ourselves to this again. I mean, that was the whole reason why I set up Jammy in the first place. And I also want to note that the previous Black Lives Matter movement gave birth to so many different causes and institutions and initiatives, which I think now are well placed to take this energy and move it forward. I think now after we've had 4 years of organisations such as Galdem and Black Ballad who centre the voices of women of colour, who put forward their stories, who really champion them. We've had there's loads of different organisations who have been born from the attention that we got previously, but nothing seemed to happen. I don't want to say nothing, but not in terms of tangible change from the point of view of legislation, from global corporations. Nothing really seemed to happen. So people created their own platforms, which now these global corporations are like starting to take notice and be like, okay, well, we'll help you, we'll work with you. And I think that's really important. That's a really important thing to note, that is one. I don't want to say positive. I feel like positive is not the right word, but it is something which is happening. And I think that makes me optimistic for the future. I think it's also really important to note that there is a lot of misinformation. And particularly when I talk about these platforms of Galdem and Black Ballad, and there are a few, I think they are doing such crucial work, because we can't rely on media organizations such as, the BBC, etc., to always give the most accurate portrayal of what's going on in the Black community, why things are going on in the Black community. And I think it's really important that as individuals and as consumers, we do our part, and to support the people who are supporting us. I think that's really important. And all I've been focusing on over the last few weeks is how can we make it so that everyone who is active now, who wants to be active, who wants to make a difference, how can we make it so that we're able to still make those differences, and really have that impact down the line. And so I would just say, I'm saying this to everyone, I say to everyone who's watching, think about where are you spending your money? Who are you buying from? Whose organizations are you contributing to? Not just in terms of like donations, but literally like, which newspapers are you buying? Like which websites are you going on and contributing to the ad revenue? Like it's the time now where we have to be so conscious about every single decision that we make, because everything we put our energy into, everything we put our money into, it is an investment. We're investing in those organizations, in those communities. And I just think it's really important that now we think so consciously about how we're doing that. And I also just wanted to make the point as well, I think it was raised by Ethel, that it's not just about Black-owned businesses, it's a structural problem. It's about our education, it's about our police, it's about the welfare system, it's about everything. And so Black-owned businesses is a huge part of that, but it's also just one part of that. And I think what I've seen in terms of Black and non-Black people starting to like write petitions and really and start to circulate information about re-education, about getting more Black history onto curriculum, changing the things that people are reading at GCSE. There's been talks about defunding and retraining the police. Like these are all parts of the puzzle that we have to continue to drive forward once this moment has ended. And that's me.
Contribution again, I think you have to agree with me that the breadth of insight and analysis here has been incredibly impressive. I'd like to go now to just general discussion, so just jump in and make your contributions. And much was made about the character of the moment we're facing today. Is it a seminal moment? Are we seeing the tipping point, particularly with white communities who are, it's suggested, are now awakening in a much more informed and mass sense to the issues that face Black communities? Now, I'm an old activist, okay? One of the things that I know is that racism is incredibly resilient, and its ability to soak up pressure is almost infinite. So I personally, I just have concerns about whether the gas that is in the current movement, once it's gone, how many people will remain, and will the structural level of inequality change as a consequence in order to make sure that we are not indeed back here marching again over some trauma and tragedy at point. And the other point I'd like you to consider is the point that was made by Fatima, which is around the trauma, because Black leadership comes, unfortunately, with a cost, and that cost is, as you can all probably attest to, is that sometimes you can get the backlash, sometimes you can feel the pain of providing truth to power. So on both issues, is it a seminal moment, and how do we maintain resilience of Black leadership in relation to some of the issues that you've mentioned? Anybody?
I think it's probably too early to know whether or not it's a seminal moment, because we're still in it, and I think it will only time will tell in terms of like how long media attention and social media attention and global attention is on it. I think some really interesting commitments have been made by politicians, not necessarily here, more in America, but also organizations in terms of investing into Black talent, investing into Black-owned businesses, and investing into the community. So real financial commitments have been made. In America, the movement has just started with, I think it's like beauty businesses to commit 15% of shelf space to beauty businesses. One of their biggest companies, Sephora, has just signed up to that. A movement has just started here as well to get businesses like Boots, Superdrug, John Lewis to commit to the same pledge. That could be incredible. That could be a game changer for Black-owned businesses. I stress could, because obviously it all comes down to the details. It comes down to things like what do those deals look like? Are they favorable to Black-owned businesses, or are they not? Also, do our community's businesses have the ability to scale to that level at this moment in time? Because obviously there are issues with funding and investment. And so I think there are a lot of, opportunities to ensure that this is a real change, but it's too soon to tell. I think our responsibility as leaders, but also as consumers and as individuals, is to make sure we hold these people to account. Everyone who posted a black square last Tuesday in blackouts and posted their message about what they're going to do and how they're going to change, like, are we holding those people to account? Are we checking up on them? Are we making sure that that's happening? Because that's the only, for most businesses, the reason why they are talking about it is because they think it's bad PR if they don't. There's not much of there's just kind of a shallow commitment, and we have a responsibility to ensure that they follow through on that. So yeah, in conclusion, too early to say, but I think we all can make it. I think we all have the ability to make this something which is a real watershed moment for the community.
Key to that is personal responsibility about where you spend your hard-earned cash. Important matter. Anybody else?
I was just going to jump in and say that even for me, someone working in the not-for-profit sector and having a charity, not-for-profit organization, I've seen how, a lot more parents, before this, before at the beginning of lockdown, we had about maybe 100 parents sign up to our free Black History course. Now, when I last checked the sign up, it was on like 420 within the last week. So, and it went up like literally within a week of 220 people. Parents, Black and white, have wanted to access the worksheets on Black history, and our Black history covers, empire, it covers Pan-Africanism, it covers, a broad range of Africa before European contact and before colonization. So it really is very, very broad. So from what I'm seeing in terms of I think there's a real shift in the public mood, and the amount of teachers I've had contact us that want to teach Black history, because it's not only about it being on the curriculum, it's actually about them having the capacity to teach as well, because we know slavery is on the curriculum, but it's not taught properly. You don't learn about the Haitian Revolution. You don't learn about the truth about slavery. So it's about equipping the teachers and ensuring that they have the capacity to deliver these sessions. And I'm seeing a lot of teachers from all around the country, emailing Blam, asking us, how can they get training? How can they access resources? What can they do? So I'm thinking there's definitely a shift within the public movement. I think if there's a shift, there can be a change. And for me, comparing to, obviously I'm quite young, but comparing to the Black Lives Matter movement in 2016, was having a lot of people saying, oh, all lives matter, and celebrities were saying all lives matter. But now, I'm seeing all celebrities up saying Black Lives Matter. If you're saying all lives matter now, you're getting castrated online. Like, people are really, really, taking a stance on unifying the commentary around being a Black issue and being Black Lives Matter as a center. So I think, with that, there is a real momentum for change in that respect. And, I'm hearing a lot of people that have never been on protest before going on protest now. I'm seeing a lot more people engaging, even with our social media. So many people are engaged with our content now. And there's a real genuine, earnest desire to learn. So I think, if there's that desire within community and society, then there can be a change. And I think, what we can do in this short space of time is create, as Khalil was saying, create partnerships, create and hold people to account, and ensure that, we can deliver these projects and ensure that people that have pledged to give to racial justice organizations, that it can be something that is seen to be done. And what I've also noticed as well is that a lot of charities that work on racial justice issues or like Black organizations find it very difficult to get funding or sustain funding. And we've had people like Charities of White call out funders and things like that. We've got a new fund for resourcing racial justice that's about as well. So I can see that there's a lot more commitment around the dialogue of investing into projects that center racial justice, and if they have more money, they have more capacity to do things. So I think in terms of people's mindset and outlook, they are willing to fund organizations that have been doing the work, which I think is important because funding is a big issue. So I think the fact that these organizations are being centered and people's ideas, how can we try and support people on the ground doing this work, I think that is going to really help in terms of changing the landscape and having the community-led voices in supporting change on a structural level. So I think there is some silver lining, although it's a tragic situation. I think the mood in the public domain has changed, and I think that is important.
The mood in the public domain is changed. Anybody else want to make a contribution on the issues that are raised?
Yeah. So I think in terms of whether it's a seminal moment, I agree with Kalia that we don't know yet. But I do think, and I agree with everything that's been said regarding the fact that it does feel very different this time around. And yes, I know people who've never demonstrated before going on demos, and this is within our community. And actually, this is where the change really is, right? If we can actually radicalize our community at a majority level across all sorts of issues that have to do with race relations, inequality, structural injustices, etc., then we can start to see some fundamental changes. Because one of the main challenges that we have had historically, and it's really important to look at the history of Black power and Black empowerment movements in order to ascertain whether this can be a seminal moment or not, and what will happen in the next sort of 5 to 10 year trajectory. Whether it's the Pan-African independence movement, whether it's the civil rights movement in the US, whether it's anti-apartheid. If we look at the history, there has always been an unfortunate level of not just compromise, but even co-option and appropriation. And really and truly, we need to understand this history well. Let me just take the civil rights movement as an example of that. It ended the apartheid segregationist system, without a doubt. It created a very affluent Black middle class. It put African Americans in positions of significant power, Supreme Court judges, etc., etc. But actually, from the 1970s onwards, and as a result of various, geopolitical things at play, as well as the flooding of Black communities with drugs, etc., there was a polarization within the Black community in terms of radical thinking. So you had a more mainstream body who were working within the system, and then you had those who were marginalized out of that. So the creation of a more affluent Black middle class, a successful Black middle class, but then the remainder of the population in poverty, in deepening poverty, actually, as we moved from the 70s into the 80s. And so by the 1990s, you had those who were either following the mainstream movements in terms of civil rights language, in terms of working within the system. And then you had those who were completely marginalized out of that because that was not working for them and would have to look for alternative, more radical options in terms of being able to get their voices heard. I had the great privilege of doing a year abroad at Spelman College, which is a historically Black university, while I was doing my BA. And that was an interesting experience in itself, and it encapsulated this. You know, Spelman College, Morehouse colleges, these historically Black universities are in Atlanta, in an area called the West End, what used to be end of the civil rights movement, historically middle-class, affluent area. Post-civil rights, a lot of people moved out, started to populate Atlanta more broadly, as they should and they can, but left an increasingly impoverished population in that area. And then you had this university with lots of very well-heeled, affluent African Americans from around the country who were coming to study in juxtaposition with this far poorer community, and the two barely spoke to each other. So I'm illustrating this mainly in order for us to be able to look at how this narrative could be co-opted outside of our own community, and to be able to watch out for that and to mitigate against it. Because if we don't do that now, to be perfectly honest with you, I can see at some point in the next 4, 5, 10 years time, many of us who may even be on the front lines now, not being able to actually find our way, almost siloed off in what would be considered respectable spaces of activism, but essentially replicating a status quo that has not fundamentally changed at the structural level. So, you know, I'm optimistic and I am hopeful, but I've got to put that caution out there. We've got to learn from history.
Well, it's a question in which you have to say, do you want to join the existing global economic system, or do you want to change that system to ensure that the policy of the status quo is not simply replicated and a black skin is put on the face of global capitalism? Interesting questions. Nobody mentioned the issue of resilience in relation to black leadership and the issue of trauma. Ethel.
Thank you, Lee. I was just going to touch on that a little bit, actually, and say that I think, so this moment or movement which we're in right now is different in that I think the echo chambers have fallen. We must realize that social media, obviously, through algorithms and things, will reflect to us that which we want to see the most or that which we look for. But I think it's important to realize that a lot of people don't always see what we're sharing or our experiences. And a lot of people are now listening and actively seeking out those experiences that we share. And as you've just said, Fatima, I think it's important that we recognize the difference or the polarization of the community around activism. There's forms of activism we often look at as respectable beyond protests, people who are in positions of corporate power or diversity and politics. But I think it's also important to realize that protest doesn't happen in one way, just on the streets. And particularly after these protests, I think it's important to realize that everyone has a responsibility to play, which is something I've seen from this Black Lives Matter movement this time, where different people are co-opting themselves and saying, I must take responsibility. I can organize something here in Bristol, or I can organize something in this small town where I don't know anyone else organizing a protest, so I'm going to do it. And I think that baton carrying must continue after the media forgets or stops covering what is going on and what we're talking about. And ways of doing that are each of us asking ourselves, what are the organizations we're connected to? How do we hold those to account? Is it where you're working? Is that sending an email to your local council? Is that sending an email to your local, I don't know, Boots, or to the hairdressers that you're working with, or the global, or the big chains that we have to rely on because we haven't yet built up Black organizations to replace those systems? It's about saying, how do we hold the people we're most connected to now to account? Are we emailing our banks and asking, what are they doing? Because I think it's easy to forget that we all have a role to play when we rely on the leaders, but those leaders get tired, as it's been mentioned. We all need time to rest. There's trauma in processing, there's trauma in speaking up and being activists. And I think it's important that everybody takes on that sort of responsibility of, you can't just wait for that person you know to speak up about something. If you see it happening, how do you talk about that, and how do you raise awareness to that? And I think respecting our collective voice, we might not see what people are saying, but giving them space to talk about what is going on. And I think an element of Black resilience in leadership is where people, if you don't necessarily agree or if you don't see somebody's point, I think seeing people who are trying to have the conversations from beyond the Black community, it's important for us to not just shut people down, but actually try and listen and hear where they're coming from. And sometimes it's downright racist, sure, but sometimes people are trying to start speaking up, but don't always know how to speak up, which I think was a big reason for the silence before. And it's about how do we bring them on this journey with us to continue that activism, even when they're not in our space. They might not get everything right first time, but the fact that they're speaking is important. And how do we make sure that they're equipped, or we connect them to the resources that do exist, so that we can, because this movement is more than just about the Black bodies leading it. It's about all the voices speaking in their different echo chambers and making sure people realize this is not just a momentary thing.
I think you're absolutely right. I was speaking to a group of maybe 50 Black students from around the country, from universities around the country, in a Zoom last night. It's a Black student movement called Black Impact. Have a look at it. It's led by Black women, incredibly new, powerful organization that is emerging for African and Caribbean students. They're on Facebook and Twitter. And during that conversation, students were reporting back that they were raising Black Lives Matter issues on the local campuses, and some of them were receiving the most horrendous kickback in relation to putting those issues on the agenda. And it's this point about resilience, having been somebody who's been traumatically scarred by a real beating from the establishment as a consequence of Black leadership. I'm always very keen to make sure that the support for emergent Black leaders who will be raising these issues is something that is very well considered, and that people are not left to be Black superstars who burn out as a consequence of, running ahead of the community, no support behind them, and then burning out when they come under this relentless attack. So that's my resilience point. I think the other point is, for me, is the extent to which the social crisis almost mirrors the environmental crisis. Both are existential threats to the fate of humanity. It's on that level. And I wonder whether you'd like to comment on whether it's our responsibility, or it is because of our experience, have we come to teach the world, or have we come to just organize our share of the current pie and come together, create economic independence, which is definitely needed, but really just become a reflection of successful other, ethnic minorities of all sorts who currently exist. Is that our ambition, or is our ambition beyond that? Should it be beyond that? Should we be satisfied with that? Is it an ethical? Am I making myself clear? Is it? Yeah. So it's a nuanced point, but the point is that would success for us just be success within the current paradigm, or would success for us be changing the paradigm? And if it's the latter, then how do we go about that?
So for me, it has to be the latter, to be perfectly honest with you. Just wanting to replicate the success of other ethnic minorities is deeply problematic, because actually we will not save our own community with that. If you look at the success of other ethnic minorities, there is still inequality within those ethnic minorities. So it is about changing the paradigm. And that's why this is a long road and why it is a long battle. But we have to be ready to start dismantling that. So how do we get about that? I think the question of, are we here to teach, or are we here just to look after ourselves, is a really, really important one. And I think it's, to be honest, a bit of both, quite frankly. I think we have to be able to defend and be clear on our parameters around our community, and to prioritize that when it's needed, particularly in terms of self-defense, in terms of resisting exploitation, violation, etc. And we need to do that by whatever means are necessary to safeguard our health, our bodily integrity. But in terms of teaching, yeah, absolutely. I'll again speak from outside of the UK context. I think it was just last year I published a small piece called that looked at African ecofeminism. So this intersection between the African feminist movement and the ecological movement, which is sort of embodied particularly in the late great Wangari Maathai, who many of us will know was the first Black woman to actually win a Nobel Peace Prize for her work with the Greenbelt movement, the replanting of trees, but she was an activist, taking on corporate structures, taking on governmental structures that were exploiting the population. And if you look at sort of, what is broadly called African ecofeminism, although not all African feminists who have ecological who are engaged in the ecological space subscribe to that term for a variety of different reasons that I won't go into here. It's very semantic. You look at what's happening on the continent there. Actually, that is in many ways the front line and the battleground of this climate injustice situation that's happening. And African women, particularly in the rural spaces, are in the coalface of that. And some of the movements that are occurring there, agroecological movements that are rejecting the corporatization of seeds, that are rejecting chemicals, that are rejecting a whole variety of really toxic capitalist incursions, which have yet to really get a stranglehold on the continent. And it's important to note this, like the Food and Agriculture Organization noted that we have lost something like 98 or 95% of our biodiversity in the 20th century. And most of that is in the global north, where you've had this massive agro-industrialization kind of movement, and you've lost whole chunks of the food basket that we used to have. Now, this is about food sovereignty, it's about starvation, but it's also about autonomy over what you put into your body, and that has a relationship with how you then engage with the government, how you engage with private sector that is exploitative. And African women farmers who are pushing agroecological movements, African women movements that are rejecting the extractive industries in Southern Africa, the mining, the devastation of land, etc. We have a lot that we can learn from those movements and what's happening there, because it is a global issue, and that is the front line. And I think, again, I am absolutely for those linkages between the diaspora, whether it's here in Europe, the Caribbean, and America, with the African continent. It's critical. The African Union recognizes the diaspora as a kind of separate member state. The extent to which that has been that effective, we don't know, but then also the diaspora needs to play a role in that, because this is a global battle, actually. And when you look at those linkages and you look at how the exploitation of Black bodies is mirrored in any part of the world, we've got to be able to center that together. And again, bringing back to the phrase of centering the politics of Blackness at a global level. So I think for me, there is something to be learned in our movements, in our battle, and we do have something to teach, but at the same time, we also need to defend our own parameters.
Certainly. I think in response to the question about is our role to teach or to be resilient, there's been something which has been shared quite a lot on social media recently, which is about everyone having their own lanes, and I really believe in that. Not everyone can take on the role of teacher because they can't, for whatever reason, that's not where they're going to excel the most. Not everyone can take on the role of protesting, of going down to protest. Not everyone can take on the role of economic boycotts and using their money to make their voice heard, just simply because they just don't have the freedom or the ability to do that. Not everyone can fulfill every function that is required, but everyone can do something. And so if people are saying, I cannot teach, I don't have the emotional capacity to deal with that, I have to focus on my resilience. For me personally, I think that that's okay as long as people are doing something. And I think in answer to the question about, are we going for our own version of what everyone else has, I don't think that's not what I'm going for anyway. I don't think I don't think that the way that other communities are set up is ideal. I definitely think that for me, the goal is what's happening at not the bottom of our community. That's not how I want to phrase it, but I mean our community strengths and I think will be measured by how people who have the least, how we are able to care for them, how we are able to treat them, how they are treated by members of other communities as well. And I think that's what we're striving for. It's not to see Black millionaires and Black billionaires, as exciting as that would be. That's not what's going to cause change for the community as a whole. That's individual success. It's about how do we create the structures, how do we keep money circulating, how can we have businesses that can hire from the Black community, who can pay fair wages, who can treat them with respect, who can help them to provide for their families, and for them to be in whatever lane they want to be, because not everyone wants to be millionaires and billionaires anyway. Some people, they have very different life goals, and kind of linking back to what I was saying, I think everyone should be free to choose their own lane. And I think that's how I see the success of our community. That's what I'm striving for. Can the people in our community choose their own lane and be happy and be free?
Can they be happy? Can they be free? With your own lane to that objective. Very interesting. Is there anybody else wishes to comment on this paradigm shift in relation to global economies? Are we happy to be economic successes within the current paradigm, or have we come to join the system or to change it? Somebody says online that, Black people should stop dreaming. You can't fix the wheel. There'll always be different classes in communities, and you're not going to change that. So, it's a forlorn hope. Anybody?
So I think in response to that comment, Lee, I would say, I think it's the people crazy enough to think we can change the world who often do. So we're going to start there by dreaming and actioning what it is that we want to see. But also alongside that, I think I want to echo Kalia's point, which is that we must look at the most underserved in our communities. I think it's important to look at the global Black diaspora, but it's also important to look at where we are locally. Where are those communities and who's serving them? And if no one's serving them, how can we direct our resources to best support them? Because I think we're only as strong as our weakest link, so many people say. And I think it's so true. We can have the Black millionaires, but if more people are homeless across the Black community, what are we doing about that? And how do we connect ourselves as different businesses, as different organizations, as individuals to meet those needs, whilst also maintaining resilience? Is my comment. And I think, so I just remembered your point, Fatima, about ecological feminism. And I think it's with us building all of our businesses, it's important to look at the whole pipeline. So look from, where are you sourcing your products? Do you know where you're sourcing them, and do you know where they're coming from? And I understand that it's not always economically viable to start from the most ecological, but I think it's important to recognize that. What is your business contributing to in terms of the environment? It doesn't just affect us here in the UK, but it actually disproportionately affects people in the global south. If we look at the droughts in Africa, it's because of the pollution going there. If we look at the floods and tsunamis happening across Asia, it's because of the pollution. And we have a role to play in that. So it's about us making our decisions and building responsible businesses as well, but also contributing responsibly where we can.
Ife, what say you to the question? Have we come to join the world or to change it?
I feel like a lot of people, when we are having a discussion about, group economics and things of that nature, when they do bring discussion about comparing us to other races, it's almost as, you need to put yourself up by the bootstrap sort of narrative. And actually, why is the Black community in it? It's not exploring our historic issues, and it's not permitting you to understand what has happened in history, that the Black community is scattered around the world. It doesn't allow you to understand fully why our narratives are completely different to other people. And I think it's a very dangerous premise premise to begin on, and to say that we need to compare the way in which we should be running our own instances with other groups that haven't experienced the same things that we have experienced. And I think it's important to understand that our narrative is going to always be different, and the way in which we envision our change should be different as well. It doesn't have to be a one shoe fits all. Do you know what I mean? And I think, particularly when you look at the history of Africa and the way in which African societies have always been, it's very much a we. You know, it's never really about the I. Do you know what I mean? It's always been something about, you know, connecting the community, you know, and it's just little things like in the language. Like, my background's Yoruba, isn't it? So, you know, I found out recently while reading a book about Yoruba proverbs that, you know, prior to colonization, you know, they didn't really, it was very much a matriarchal society, in that, you know, the names in which people had were not gendered. So if you meet someone called Toby, a girl could be called Toby and a boy could be called Toby. A girl could be called Ife, a boy could be called Ife. So the way in which we were seeing gender, and the way in which we didn't have such an emphasis on you need to have a feminine name and a masculine name, because it was more about, you know, community respect, you know, elders, language and culture. And I think, you know, once we get back to those traditional values of centering the community and centering culture, I think there's a shift. And I think, you know, we have a responsibility if we are here in the UK. Obviously, I am very much, you know, Pan-African in my outlook in terms of, you know, giving back to the continent, and the continent is interlinked with how we are treated and how we are perceived. However, I think, you know, it's important to remember that we are in the UK. And it's okay to be in the UK. I think it's okay to want change in the UK. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think, you know, we shouldn't be forced to have to leave the UK. Actually, we have livelihoods that are built up here. We've contributed to building this country, and we have the right to stay here. I don't think we should be forced to leave. I think if you want to leave, you can leave. But I think, you know, I'm equally as invested here as I am invested in Africa. I mean, obviously I want change in Africa as well, but I have the right to want change here as well. And I think, you know, sometimes we're made to feel guilty, or, you know, made to feel as though we should just go back to our countries and fix it. And I think that's another dangerous premise as well, because it comes with the notion that we know better how to tell people how to run their countries, people that have been living there for centuries and actually have systems that have been going on for longer than older civilizations in the world. And I think it's important to, you know, if we are going to want to support Africa, to come with a bottom-up approach, and not kind of come in there, you know, with the idea that, you know, we have the answers, because if we had all the answers, things would be fixed here in the UK for us. We don't have all the answers. It's okay to not have all the answers. And I really echo the points that Clea was saying, in that, you know, we're doing people that are talented to do other things in the community. So you have people that are, you know, better at teaching, you know, you have people that are better at doing different things. I think it's important that we, you know, value our differences and, you know, understand what we can bring. But I think we also need to stop relying so heavily on philanthropy. Like, there's such a, you know, obviously I love Stormzy, I love everything that he does. I love, you know, when people give back, you know, like Akon give back, but they are not state bodies. They are not people set up to represent us. And I think those in the account that, you know, take our tax money, those in the account that, you know, we put in a position to, you know, govern us by consent, should be the ones, you know, invoking change. We shouldn't be having to rely on celebrities. And I think, you know, when we're looking at people like the Carters, there's a girl called Jade Ventul, a black feminist on Twitter. She does a lot of important work, and she did a thread about, you know, how the Carters have, you know, made so much money off the symbolism of, you know, black power. But when it comes to, you know, active change in the community, or, you know, being able to support structural change, they haven't been seen. And, you know, the commentary around the Black Power movement when we had things going on now was very questionable, and, you know, the community was confused. So, you know, it was all for them to make profit. And I think we need to not be so heavily reliant on celebrities, that actually see what we can do in collectives. Like, you know, we've been doing mutual aid groups as communities, we've had partner schemes. I think, you know, we need to go back to collective community activism and actually finding strength within the community to do things ourselves, and not be over reliant on people coming in. Actually, there's strength in our numbers. You know, there's about 2 million black people. I might be wrong, might be more, but, you know, if 2 million black people put £1 in the bank, would have 2 million in a bank account that can be serving the black community. I think we all too often forget our power as a community, as a collective. And I think we need to go back into having that collective solidarity and see, you know, what we can do within our communities, whether that's mutual aid, whether that is, you know, as I said, partner schemes, whether that is, you know, community schools. You know, the power is within the community, and we have enough infrastructure if we create it to seek change that we want to seek, and not have to overly rely on a leader, or, you know, because we see, you know, historically how, you know, which is why Black Lives Matter is the way that it is. It hasn't really got a leader because it's adapted to historically how Black movements have had leaders stifled out, had leaders killed off, like Fred Hampton, like Malcolm X, and how that stifles movement. So it's kind of grown up in a structure that doesn't have, one person or one entity. But I think, with that, we can still rely on the community and have community voices and people organizing within communities to make things like mutual aid groups a norm and things of that nature. So that's what I would say.
So the consensus is then we've come to change it, not to join it. And I think that's been reflected in what everybody, a contribution has been made today. As we come into the last half an hour of the programme, I want to explore the issue of Black women's leadership in all of this paradigm shift delivery that we're talking about, and partly why I've had an all-women panel today, because there are challenges to that. Let's be frank about it and real. There is a patriarchy that is in existence. You've got men of a certain age, of which is I'm in that cohort, who are in leadership positions. It's not just men. It's a generational thing. But in relation to the emergence, particularly within the Black Lives Matter movement, more generally of that Black women's feminist leadership, how do you see that? Is that a paradigm shift? Is the Black community now ready for that kind of, frankly, I'm ready for any leadership that takes us forward, wherever it comes from. And I can see women, and I've always surrounded myself with Black women. I just couldn't be where I was as an activist today had I not had that support from day one, and I still retain it today. Thank the Lord, and I hope that continues. But I want to succession plan the next, help succession plan that next generation of leadership. Do you see yourselves as emerging into that space?
Well, for me, I think it's important to
look at pause there. I'm not saying, well, is it the wrong question? You can always tell me if I've got the wrong question. Right.
For me, I think it's important to look at the history of people of African descent and heritage. Black women we're not strangers to being at the forefront of our movements, at the forefront of our communities. We don't have to look too far, but to see Queen Nanny, who was the leader of Jamaican Maroons. So it's always been a long time that Black women have been historically in Africa as well. Queen Nzinga, Queen Amina. We've had Black women in leadership positions, and actually it wasn't a thing that wasn't normal. That Black women were very vocal in their communities. You had Queen Yara Santawa. You had all these different women that took up strength and embodied community strength and leadership. So I think it's just Black women have been doing that. If you look at the movements that have gone in the past, Black women have been very vocal. We've been at the focus point. I think within the West, then it has been obviously altered the way in which we perceive activism under the constraints of patriarchy and things of that nature. However, I think it's important to remember that when we are looking at historically African tradition, we've always had women at the forefront. We've always, prior to colonization, when Black women weren't given leadership positions by colonial masters, white colonial masters, they weren't given, because in the UK and in Europe, it was it wasn't a thing where women were allowed to have those positions. But prior to that, women were able to speak, women were able to have ownership and leadership in their communities. And I think it's important to remember that when looking at things from a Black perspective, how Black women have always been, involved in community activism and actually being, speakers in their communities. So I think that is something of importance to reckon within certain communities within Africa, particularly around West Africa. Yes, I think that is something that should be looked into. I think that it's very beautiful to see that now in the West, in modern society, we're seeing Black women being the center, being at the front of these movements. And I think it's only going to just become more normalized. I think it's just something that is I wouldn't put myself out there as a female leader, but I think it's just your work speaks for itself, and it's not like people are out there parading. Because I think the silence in the group was because we're thinking, would we call ourselves a female leader? But I think we're in spaces trying to make change, and I think that is the most important thing. And I think there shouldn't be anything stopping you from doing that. And I think if you're leaving, as we said at the beginning of this, if you're leaving Black women out of the conversation, you're leaving 50% of women or 50% of the population out of the conversation, and that's not going to work in any regard. So I think it's important to have female leaders, because female people are part of the community, female women are part of the community as well. So that's just my points on it.
Do we fight shy of Uncle's characterization of leadership? Was that the pause?
Is that directed to me? Sorry.
Oh, anybody. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
I wondered whether the pause was my characterization of leadership as I posed. Because let me be frank, right? I know Ife. Ife's a leader. I mean, whether she wants to accept that title or not, I don't know. But I know her to be a leader in terms of intellectual and ethical commitment to representing her community. I would say she has those leadership credentials.
So for me, I think the most important thing is amplification and battling battling erasure. So and a few other things as well that I'll touch on. You know, as Ife rightly said, Black women have been at the forefront of movements, you know, time immemorial, you know, taking it out of the African context as well, right here, you know, I go down to Brixton still on a regular basis. I walk past the now kind of silent Olive Morris house. Olive Morris has been a massive part of my sort of understanding of, you know, Black protests growing up in Brixton. And I worry about erasure of her legacy, to be perfectly honest with you, as that house closed down. And I know that there's a group that are working on that, but there has been erasure. So for all of the women that we know, there are so many who have done stuff that we don't. So that's something we need to keep a constant eye on. But amplification at the moment is critical, and we've got to find a balance between the collective action that Ife was also talking about and the importance of people coming forward to work collectively, using their own strengths in order to progress the movement in different areas, and also centering those who are clearly leaders, who have clearly got something, you know, erudite and clear to say that can actually propel the movement to even greater heights and get some traction going forward. And we have to be ready to protect those leaders as well. And this brings us back to the issue of trauma, because it's constant, you know, like when the pandemic hit, everybody was in lockdown, you know, the whole webinar thing kicked off. Like we'd never been on so many Zoom meetings in our lives. And I was joining a lot of, or listening to when I could, a lot of webinars hosted by, you know, African feminist bodies, and the trolling in those spaces was just horrendous, and it's still happening, you know. So literally, you know, you publicize it on Twitter, and a whole bunch of racist, you know, white supremacist men primarily will jump on and just completely take up all of the spaces, you know, within the Zoom meeting, and just be hurling abuse, and the trauma of that is horrendous. So we've got to figure out a way to protect those of us who are actually pushing this work going forward. But then on the final issue, actually, in terms of leadership as well, you know, we want more than just representation in anything, you know, whether it's women or being Black or, you know, or having a disability. It's got to be more than just representation. We don't want tokenism. So we also have to be willing to actually hold our leaders to account, you know, whether they're women or not. We need to understand, you know, what is it that they're also trying to achieve, because that is something that has been used against us in the past, right? Where we'll have tokenistic individuals particularly put forward and, you know, made into celebrities. And I think the Carters is an excellent example of that. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's been something that I've had such an issue with for so many years. And it's very easy for certain, for the sound bites to convince you otherwise. You know, Black power, Black empowerment is so easily packageable. And we've got to guard against that, as we also guard our leaders, but also allow space for a democratic collective action, which I think is where our real power lies as well.
Okay, anybody else wish to comment?
I'm just going to recommend Angela Davis's book on women, race and class, which I think speaks so well to the question of female leadership, particularly Black women in positions of leadership, because I think it's our politics or the power that we have within society, or the way we experience the world. We're not just fighting against racism. We're not just fighting against sexism. It could be classism as well. It could be disability. It could be sexuality. That intersection of experience and having to fight everything at the same time, or a lot of things at the same time, I think gives us an interesting perspective of of how do we bring solutions to issues and representation in positions of power. But I think it's not exclusive to us, but we do have a really interesting and unique perspective to positions of leadership, and we must just get up and do stuff.
We must just get up and do stuff, whoever you are, let's get up and do it. I think that's absolutely right. Well, it's been a fascinating discussion, and we're coming into the end of the program, so I'm going to ask you to bring together your final concluding remarks as the 2 hours. It's like a TARDIS on the Lee Jasper drive time. It's 2 hours, but it's gone in a blink of an eye. We suspend the normal rules of time and motion when we have quality discussions on this program. So you could ask you to get that. I think you're making some interesting points. I'm just going to say, as a black man, that I found women much more emotionally intelligent and much more ethical in their leadership than the brothers. Okay? It might sound like a sweeping statement, but after 40 years of activism, I know who's still standing around me and I know who's not. And the overwhelming perspective from my experience is that it's invariably women. And when that attack comes on black leadership, and it has in relation to my own career, there have been some black men there, and I'm thankful for that, but black women have been resolutely providing that support. It may be a dynamic we need to feature on another show. Maybe I shall get a panel of black men and challenge them to try and explain this. And I think the most recent example was the Sarah Reid case. Sarah Reid died in Pentonville Hospital, and I was honoured enough to break open the case into the national news media, and I worked with the family all the way along, including attending the inquest, which was a nightmare to sit through and listen to. Trauma, that was trauma indeed for me. I need to break after it, as did the family. Seeking to get traction in the community for the support for Sarah Reid, it was easy amongst women's groups, but the men were completely absent. Now, if that had been a black man who had died in custody, I wouldn't have any problem getting men involved in that particular campaign. So from a male perspective, I don't expect you to comment and answer at this stage. I'm just offering it as out there to the audience and wider. That has been my experience. Black men have got a lot of responsibility to step up, in my expectation, in relation to their ethical leadership and others. So, as I've given you time now to collect your thoughts as we bring the ship into the harbour, as my dear old father used to say, and who wants to go first in rounding up where we're at and the future? Ethel looks like she's ready at the gate. Let's go.
Sure. I think my thoughts from this discussion, and I've learned a lot from my fellow panelists actually, around centering Black narratives. We've talked about how do we not only help the people that we're most immediately aligned to, but how do we look at Black society as a whole, or look at ourselves within society, and how do we support each other? And also, I think around education, which Ife, you brought up, I think my closing thoughts with this would be, we can all do something, and regardless of how small it is, like a pebble in the lake, we can all start making a difference if we choose and accept that responsibility to move forward. And it's about looking at how does that impact structural change. And I think it's important to get on the petitions, but it's also important to look at the ones that are going to government to be debated. So looking at UK government petitions, what are the change petitions leading towards? I think it's important to think about impact and all the different things we're doing, no matter how small, it's as important.
Thank you, Ethel. Again, some great summarizing points. Kalila, what do you say in your summarizing? You're taking your earphones out. Can you hear us? Oh, yes, good. I thought she's thrown in the towel. She's quitting. You're summarizing points.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think I won't spend too long, because I think everything that I've already said and has already been said. I've learned a lot from everyone who's been speaking on the panel, so thank you for sharing. I think for me, it's just about everyone doing their bit, working out what their bit is, where they can really contribute, where they can make the most impact, and making sure they do it over a long period of time. Like they do it consistently, like you show up in whatever lane you've chosen for yourself, that you are committed, that you are, whether that's making a commitment to spend more consciously in Black-owned businesses, which I think everyone should be doing. I think if that's holding your employers, your colleagues to account, holding any business that you shop in to account for the things that they have promised, the things that they've said, turning up at protests if you're able to, signing petitions, making sure that this goes on beyond just being a moment. I think that is the thing we need to do in order to create change. We all need to be committed long term. And there's so many ways that we can do that. And so I think it's just about making sure you're educated on the different avenues that are open to us as individuals to make our voice heard. Sticking the road, because it's going to be a long road. It's not going to happen quickly. But it's something which is really important. And I do believe that if we stick to it, real change will come.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Going on to Ife, give us your concluding thoughts.
Well, I'm sad that it's ending.
Let's make the movie.
Yeah, no, I've actually had a really good time. I think it was just nice breaking bread with fellow sisters and just, just bouncing off each other. I mean, as similar to Ethel as well, I've taken a lot of notes down of stuff that people have recommended to read and people's names that I haven't heard of. So I'm grateful to have the opportunity to learn. And I think, for me, as someone who chairs a not-for-profit that is all about educating and ensuring that education is more reflective of Black narratives. For me, education is very important. And I think, anyone that is in spaces of education to try and push for Black narratives to be taught in your school, trying to, BLAM is still giving out free African and Caribbean history worksheets. I think some adults might even need to use it, but we've got podcasts that people can listen to about Black history globally. It's only like 5 minutes long, but just doing everything you can to really educate yourself and to submerge yourself in the issue, and to, if you don't want it to rely on the media to dictate when you're taking an interest in something, create your own sort of platform in which the content that you are being able to read or being able to engage in is centered around narratives that are of importance to you. So for me, my Netflix is very much centered around issues in the Black community. So I think, creating spaces that suit your reality, I think that's another thing that's empowering. So I think, don't let this die down, collect books, read books, watch documentaries, allow this to be at the forefront of your mind, link up with like-minded people, change your Twitter feed to people that, follow speakers that are, centered around these issues. If you don't want the movement to die out because the mainstream people aren't talking about it, make your mainstream focus around the issues. So that's another thing I would say to keep the momentum going for you yourself and to give you strength, because, iron sharpens iron. We do need to pick up sometimes. We do need to read some, uplifting quotes. So I would say, center your reality to make sure that you're not relying on the movement to be mainstream for you to continue doing the movement's work. Actually make the movement your mainstream outlook, I would say. And I echo what everyone else is saying as well, in terms of not feeling as though there's only one right way to do activism, or there's only one right way to see change, because change comes in many different formats. And I think it's important to see where your strengths lie, see how you can support, see how you can keep investing. And for me, education is a big thing, to see how you can invest in education and let people know, especially young people know, ages 6 to 16, that BLAM is giving out free educational worksheets on African and Caribbean history and Black British history as well for them to engage in. So those are just my closing remarks, just ensuring that you center the narratives and the reality that you want to be at the center going forwards. I think it's all about ensuring that the narratives all around you don't change, and actually it will almost be like every day is a day of activism, because your feed and the things that you're engaging in are actively allowing you to see the next steps you need to take in order to ensure Black Lives Matter, and the things in which it embodies are something that can be a real plausible reality for all in society.
Change your information atmosphere. Feed your mind by diverse and broad pieces of creative information culture, history, and activism. I do it. I try and do it every day, and I'm always learning, and I've learned from this discussion. Fatima, it was your concluding remarks.
So first of all, I want to thank you, Lee, and also all of the panelists for a really engaging discussion. I've also learned a lot. And I think my first comment really is that the next few months are going to be hard. You know, this pandemic has been a major economic shock. I think some of us have already seen sort of, you know, the wider stats around, you know, how the economy is going to tank by about 20%. And what that means for the Black community is that we will probably be shouldering much of that burden, because whenever there's an economic shock, the most vulnerable, the most marginalized carry it, and race and class are completely intertwined in this country. So, you know, the precarity of our economic positions that most or a large chunk of Black people live with means that the next few months are going to be hard. So just to echo what's already been said in terms of what you can do, the most important thing is to guard your mental health, stay safe, and do everything that has been suggested so far. Try and learn as much as you can. And very importantly, this is critical, really critical. Try and get sources from people from within our own community, people of African descent, because we are not sourced enough, we are not cited enough. It's a major issue. You look at so many different documentations across different sectors, and you will not see Black authors cited, even though they're writing. And so on that note, I want to speak to, just very quickly, you know, Sarah Reid was mentioned there towards the end, and I feel that deeply in my gut. You know, I was at the vigils back then. I also attended one part of the inquest, and it was a deeply painful experience for everybody, and I cannot even imagine how the family went through. But this whole issue of, you know, Black women's pain and Black women's bodies and the sovereignty around that, and how do we change that within our own community, I want to recommend 2 books by Black authors, if I can just throw them up here. The first one, The Will to Change by Bell Hooks, Men, Masculinity and Love. This is a great book. Bell Hooks will be known to many, great African-American feminist thinker, intersectional, centers race, class, sexuality in all of her work. A hopeful book on how we engage with issues around gender relationships. And then this one by J.J. Bolla, a man of African descent here in the UK, Masculinity Redefined. And I think, you know, these kinds of books and, you know, these kinds of, this knowledge is quite critical. And a lot of it is not known out there. You know, I am very privileged to know a lot of Black men who who actually are brave enough to call themselves feminists, or who have very feminist leanings. I came out of the whole 1990s kind of poetry scene, and you know, and a lot of the men from that space have engaged with these issues in ways that perhaps maybe others have not experienced in the same way. But this work is there to be read, and so I think it's really important we try and source out the most obscure pieces of knowledge that's been generated by our community, by people who look like us, by people who've had similar experiences to us or slightly different experiences to us, in order to equip ourselves with that knowledge. And I will end there.
Thank you very much, Fatima. Well, I'd like to thank my panel for joining Lee Jasper Drive Time. It's 11:54, so we've got 6 minutes to go. And can I just say thank you to each and every one of you. I thought tonight, I'd like to have you all back actually as a panel to discuss some other stuff. So I think I might recruit you all as my go-to panel on some issues. So thank you for that. Thank you for the audience. I know it was much reduced in numbers. I get that feel because I think Facebook is trying to limit the extent to we can get this all authentic discussions in a way that suits us. Probably we need our own social media platform is the conclusion that I come to. So thank you for the audience for supporting us and getting involved. You know, I think that there is a rise of Black women's leadership. It's a rise of visibility. It's much like police brutality. It was always there, but now it's been filmed. And that's been the challenge today, and we've delivered it, I think, in giving you the much informed, incredible wisdom that you heard from all of our contributors. We haven't come just to join the system. We simply don't want to be successful capitalists. Everybody came to the conclusion that we've come to change that system. And in that sense, they said we've not only just come to consolidate black power within a sort of American imperialist context, which means we just all get rich and we're not really we're replicating the class system within our own communities, but we come to paradigm shift into a new global green economy, and one in which the global South begins to receive the justice it so richly deserves from the North, who have become bloated, complacent, arrogant, to the point of bringing the world to destruction, both in terms of the environment and now with the poverty that is given born to a biological threat that poses an existential challenge to the entirety of humanity. And on those profound and deep words, we bring the show to a close. Now, I'm here every Saturday between 10 and 12, so I want you to keep tuning in. We've got some fabulous shows coming up. We're going to do more on, I'm going to have a group of white people on my show because I want to put to them some of the issues that you white people in particular influence of power and positions, because I think it's important that we hear what they say about the current moment and whether it's seminal and how it's affected them and so on and so forth. We're going to be doing stuff with black businesses and revisiting that. We're going to come back to the issue of education. And can I remind you to log on to Aspire Education Group Facebook page so that you can help distribute the education survey. And let me tell you why that's important, because in this paradigm shift, we must paradigm shift the approach to education. Everybody here has spoken about the importance of Black history. I believe Black history should be taught in school, but I pick up on Ife's point she made, that actually we want Black parents to be taught Black history, because I don't rely on the school to teach my kids Black history. That is a cultural tradition that is mine to bequeath to my children. And I need to know it and understand it and be immersed in it so that I can give my children that cultural confidence. I call my cultural understanding my superpower. People ask how I'm resilient to the attacks that come my way. And it's been because I send them 10,000 years of African history. Of whom should I be afraid? And with that, I think I offer you the challenge that, yes, let's get Black history on the curriculum. But if it's not in the curriculum of your own mind, then you're relying on them to teach us about our own history. And for me, that's perverse and cannot possibly be sustainable. So we'll have lots more programs between 10 and 12 every morning throughout this lockdown. I hope you've enjoyed the Lee Jasper Drive Time editions so far. You can go back and look at all of the other programs and building them up into quite a helpful insight into some of the issues, mental health and others around the key challenges facing our community. And I hope you'll agree with me. Today's been a absolute joy. Now, you're not going to get rid of me off your airwaves, I'm afraid. I'm on tomorrow afternoon at 4 o'clock for the Bub Report, B-U-B-B, the Bub Report. You may say, well, what is that? It's a international global platform on racing, policing, social justice, and it focuses on the Afro-Caribbean diaspora. I'm joined by Selena Caesar Chavons, former MP at the House of Commons Canada, Arlie Gill, who is a ambassador, Grenada's ambassador to CARICOM, Anna Kim Robinson, Head Start Alliance of the International Justice Organization, Dr. Angelica Ben, sociologist from Howard University, and its host is Kellon Bob, B-U-B-B. It's on 4 o'clock tomorrow, a great esteemed international panel. I'm honored to be on that tomorrow, and you can get it on Facebook and on YouTube. I'm also on The Hidden Truth, which is our beloved brother Mohammed, Andrew Mohammed, and he will have me and Mr. Davis, Jay Davis, another fabulous young leader from the Manhood Global Academy, on his show on Tuesday evening. I think it's 6:30. And yeah, I'm afraid I'm on there all over the weekend and beyond. This is Lee Jasper. You've been watching Lee Jasper Drive Time. Share it with your friends. Break the monopoly. Let's have these independent black channels flourishing all over the internet during this lockdown. I'll see you next week. Thank you and goodbye.
Hi, my name's Lee Jasper. This is Brixton, London, and you're watching Lee Jasper Drive Time.